Hello, everyone who is joining us, lovely literary people. I hope you're having a marvellous evening. It's about to get much, much better. I'm really super excited to be chairing this fabulous event. My name is Burnell and I am an author, an actor, and I'm currently the BBC's Ambassador for Disability. So it's a real privilege to be talking to these three amazing female authors who have all identified as autistic. It's a real delight to be hosting an Own Voices event where we're going to be discussing the importance of neurodivergent narratives and how we can amplify them and raise them, the great work that's already happened, and all of the brilliant things that are to come. So I hope everyone's got a lovely glass of wine or cup of tea or just some juice, that everyone's nice and comfy. I think it's time for us to meet our fantastic authors. So I would love to introduce you to the amazing Smail, who is the author of Geek. She'll be joining us very shortly. Here she is, looking summery and lovely. Hello, Holly, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm enjoying the sunshine.
You're in sunny Brighton, I believe.
Yes, I am, right down by the sea. So,
lovely. Okay, so we've got our seaside girl, Holly. I would also really love to introduce you to a sparkly brand new author, a new girl on the scene. She's an author and illustrator, and her illustrations are just fantastic. Please welcome Abigail Balfe. She'll be joining us very shortly. This is the summer on Zooms. Hello, Abigail, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Just chilling out in my child's play tent, the usual, you know.
It just looks idyllic. It looks like the place that we all want to go to after a hard day of 7 million Zooms, really.
Yeah, it's very soft, very comforting, and blocks out the sounds of the seagulls. Because I'm also
in Brighton as well, I believe. Yeah, and you've got fairy lights. We all need some more fairy lights in our life. And on that sparkly fairy note, I'm going to introduce our last fabulous award-winning author, the brilliant Elle McNichol. After I've introduced people, it just takes a little while for Zoom to wake up, and here she is. I feel like we should clap.
No.
Well, lovely to see you. No clapping, no clapping. Okay. Where are you zooming in from today, my lovely?
Zooming in from East London. Yep.
East London. Okay, so we've got a very southern-based literary neurodivergent event for you all, which I'm sure is going to be fabulous. And I would just like to say, you know, in the culture of Zoom, anything can happen, as we all know. So if we lose anyone throughout the event, or if someone's cat suddenly decides to make an appearance, or there's drilling next door, or there's a thunderstorm, or, you know, any of the stuff that we all know can happen, just bear with us, and we will be with you shortly. All right, well, I'm going to begin by talking to the fabulous Holly. I have her beautiful book here, which I recently reread and absolutely fell in love with the character of Harriet Manners all over again. What an absolute superstar smasher. Holly, I would just really like to ask you to share, if you're happy to do so, about your own diagnosis and whenabouts that came in your life. Because I don't know if everyone listening to the event will be aware of your story, but I certainly became aware of you more so after you wrote that beautiful article in The Guardian where you detailed your childhood and your sort of lack of understanding and some of the difficulties you had socially, you know, trying to make friends at school, the beautiful scene you depicted where you brought rocks in and tried to interest your classmates in the rocks. And it just felt so familiar and so lovely. And obviously you wrote The Fabulous Geek Girl before you had your diagnosis. But I wondered if you could just, if you're happy to, just share a little bit about how you think knowing that you're autistic will influence your writing in the future, and how it incidentally, majorly influenced your writing in the creation of Harriet.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of came about it the opposite way around to most people who knew they were autistic and then wrote books about the fact that they knew they were autistic. Whereas I wrote books and then found out last year that I was autistic, which means that I came about it completely the opposite way around, and haven't actually written anything since knowing I was autistic. So how that's going to affect my work going forwards is quite scary, actually, because I mean, Geek Girl was just literally me trying to express myself as a teenager. It was just trying to, I don't know, put a voice out there that I hadn't read, that was trying to kind of work through the traumas that I'd been through at school, and the fact that I'd felt different since I was 3 years old and I'd never understood why. And it's weird that I spent a decade writing 8 novels all about basically being autistic, not knowing that it was about
the character is so lovably neurodivergent. Once you know that, I suppose I'm surprised that no one sort of picked up on that. But then I guess if we look at when the book was written, which is it 10 years ago that the first one came out?
Yeah, it was a long
so
time.
we didn't have that awareness. But I also think it's really important within disabled narratives to have characters where you don't have to label their identity, and they can just be going about their lives. And if someone reads that character and thinks, oh, maybe they're autistic, or maybe they're dyslexic, I don't think we always have to call it out.
I think the reality is if I was writing more Geek Girl books, which I might do eventually, she would be diagnosed. The only reason that she wasn't labelled at the time was because I wasn't labelled, so I didn't know. So that's the only reason that I wouldn't. I do see your point, but I'm very happy to say that Harriet is autistic now, because obviously, given that I had no idea, I had to diagnose myself before I understood that my fictional teenage self was also autistic. But yeah, very weird way to do it. A lot of people, it's funny because a lot of people talk about having been diagnosed as a result of their kids being diagnosed. So their kids go to school, they get picked up on, and then they come home and the parents are like, but hang on, that's the same as me. And then the parents get a diagnosis, because obviously when we were younger in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't happening. There weren't people being diagnosed. And I kind of feel like that happened with my fictional teenage daughter, essentially. Like,
yes,
people coming to me
absolutely.
There were people coming to me and going, is she autistic? And for literally 8 years, I was like, no, because I'm not. So how could she be? Even the National Autistic Society sent me a message saying, is she autistic? Because she appears to be autistic. And I was like, what?
Realise that. So,
no.
So in some ways, she led you to your discovery.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I pushed back on it hard because I was scared. And every time someone asked me if I was autistic, because Harriet seemed to be autistic, I would Google autism and I would go, that's really frightening and I don't want to look anymore. And I don't identify it. It would be like, no empathy. And I'd be like, well, that doesn't sound right. Or completely unable to make eye contact. And I'd be like, that doesn't sound right. So I'd read the list of those traits.
But that's such an interesting point that you've come to, Holly, and you've actually just started to answer my next question, because you're obviously a genius and psychic.
Obviously.
Which is that I just want to, obviously this is a fabulous literary event, but I just want to take a moment to examine the description and the narrative of autism that we've all been told really since the 80s, which is predominantly one that relates to sort of male white boys, and anyone who doesn't fall into that category has or is still very easily missed. Yeah. So when you were wildly Googling characteristics of autism and does this sound like me, perhaps that perhaps the things that you were discovering weren't specific to female autism, or indeed, you know, trans autism, or, you know, gender neutral autism.
It wasn't up to date.
Said,
It just
no, and it also, it can, I think it's, you know, it's really important just to specify that actually any disability can manifest differently in any person. So there, I feel like there are sort of guidelines for what various disabilities are. And also there can be massive crossovers as well. You could be dyslexic and ADHD. So I think it's always really important to bear that in mind in life, just for yourself, but also when you're creating and writing characters. But the wonderful thing about Harriet is that she rings so true in such a moving and wonderful way. And I just want to give a little example of her absolute brilliance. So she's, as we've established, she's a teenager, she's struggling to fit in at school, and she starts the book off by stating that she really doesn't like fashion, it's just not her. And then she accidentally gets spotted. And I just want to read this tiny section because I just think it's such a huge insight, and it's so sort of heartwarming and glorious. This is it. This is what I can do to change things. This could be my metamorphosis story, like Ovid's or Kafka's or Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling, or even Cinderella, originally called I can't say that word. What's it originally called, Holly?
God knows.
Rhodopis, and written in Greece in 1 BC. I could go from a proverbial caterpillar to a butterfly, from a tadpole to a frog, from lava to a dragonfly, which is actually only half a metamorphosis, but still, I think it's worth mentioning. I just love that. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's spot on for her character, and it just made me really, really love her, that she's got all of this information about Cinderella, you know, about dragonflies, and that she just really wants to share that and to spill that out. And it just really, really warmed my heart to read that. And I've just got one other little section, which I literally, I mean, we say lol all the time, I literally laughed out loud at her beautiful intention that just goes so wrong. So this is when she is she's got the modelling contract, and she's about to get some lovely makeup done. And they're talking about the type of makeup that she'll have done, which is cat's eyes. And Harriet's done loads of research about fashion, and she realises that she knows something about cat's eyes, and so she can actually share. And so she says, cat's eyes have a mirror-like membrane on the back to maximise light exposure. That's why they shine in the dark. And then the two ladies look at her, and she goes on to say, on the subject of fashion, I add quickly, mentally trawling through the research I did last night, did you know that in the 18th century, it was very hip to stick on eyebrows made out of mice skin? I just think that's wonderful. It's absolutely, it's so genuine and authentic, and she's so passionately trying to share her research. But she's slightly done that thing of not quite reading the room, or you know, not quite understanding the dynamic. So she's ploughing forward with what she wants to share, and they just want to make her look pretty and put some makeup on her. But I really found the book so beautiful, and I would thoroughly recommend to anyone to read, whether you are on the spectrum or not. Available at all good bookshops, including Waterstones, I believe. And let's move on to speak to the lovely Abigail, who you are very newly published, my darling, aren't you?
Yeah, 3 weeks ago today.
3 weeks ago today. Woo, woo. That is very exciting. I'm going to hold the book up. It is really, really beautiful. And the thing that I love about this book is just, it's almost like, I don't know, it's sort of like a guide, you know, a stroke sort of self-help book, stroke maybe almost not self-diagnosis, but certainly, you know, if you're a young person and you're trying to better understand all the different ways that a disability could manifest, I feel like this book, in fact, not even a young person, adults included, because I have learned a lot from reading this book. And the illustrations are just so wonderful. I'm just going to hold this one up because I think it's really, really charming. And it's a picture of you when you're little, and then you when you're grown up. And it's, you know, this is me, and then this is also me. When I didn't know that I was autistic, but now I do, and it explains so much of my life to me. You know, I really feel like that is a huge echo of Holly's experience. But I would love for you to read a little section of the book if you're happy to, Abby.
Sure.
You've got this beautiful paragraph on page 14 about autism being invisible. If you wouldn't mind just reading the first paragraph.
Sure. However, what was the bit before it? However, oh yeah. Okay, autism is often invisible to the untrained, or indeed often the trained eye, something that is not very helpful when you are one of those autistic people attempting to make sense of the confusing world around you, and when you just want a simple, non-challenging breakfast to see you through the day. Oh yeah, because on the previous page, it said that autism, something about being like an overwhelming yet delicious breakfast buffet, open to everyone. Yeah. Side note, and there are plenty of side notes. Who in their right mind, whatever that means, I'm pretty sure that isn't a right or a wrong mind, just different minds. But anyway, that's beside the point. Yeah, who in their right mind made the decision to put cucumber in a sandwich? It's basically like eating a squashed slug inside a piece of wet cloth. Disgusting. And there's the slug saying rude because he's in the wet cloth. And yes,
well,
now
apologies to anyone who loves cucumber.
Yes, apologies to everyone.
Yeah, I really love that
the cucumber people.
It so often is invisible, and I think I really love that you've put the untrained, or indeed often the trained eye, because, you know, as we've established, it can be so often missed if you don't fit that sort of really stereotypical profile of autism that we've all had dictated to us. And I feel like now is a real moment in the world and in literature, and, you know, luckily children's literature is really leading the way, where we're actually realizing that the spectrum is far, far broader than we ever realized, and very diverse, in fact, you know, and that many of us are on it in one form or another. And it can look like lots of different things. There is no one true narrative. Someone is never not autistic enough, or, you know, very autistic. It's, you know, there are many different things in between. And it's also about how that person identifies as well for themselves, I feel. But Abigail, I would love you, if you're happy to, just to read the brilliant descriptions you have got on the following page about being neurodivergent, which I thought that meant something different to what it means. So I'm really dyslexic, and I've been saying that I'm neurodiverse, but apparently I've been giving people the wrong information. So Abigail is going to enlighten us.
Okay. Neurodivergent. Differing in brain function from what is considered typical or normal. Examples of neurodivergence include autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, dyscalculia, and Tourette syndrome. Anyone who is not neurodivergent is neurotypical. Neurotypical. Oh yeah.
Okay, so I've been telling people that I was neurodiverse, but I'm actually neurodivergent.
And I'd been making the same mistake up until a few months ago too. I think like
Who
we
knew?
haven't really been taught the language in which to talk about our own experiences. And like I was only diagnosed 2.5 years ago, and I'm still learning about about things, and writing this book has taught me a lot. As much as it's teaching other people who are reading it, I've learned a lot through producing it.
Amazing, actually, Abigail. That's really wonderful to hear. So you have written the book that you needed, in fact, and I feel like you've absolutely hit the nail upon the head, because it's so simple and so informative, and just really easy to absorb, and it doesn't feel challenging. It just feels like a friend, almost like someone is really generously and gently explaining all of these things to you in a way that you can digest. So
Yeah,
I'm delighted for you, and I'm really proud that
thanks.
this exists.
Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to do when producing the book, because I think sometimes neurodivergence can create a barrier between wanting to read a book and actually being able to read it. And I thought the content in the book that I wanted to create would appeal to people of different neurodivergences as well as people who are neurotypical. And I wanted the structure and the layout to be accessible to as many different brain types as possible. So and it's been really nice to hear that people who are dyslexic and people with ADHD have been able to read it. And like I've had messages from parents saying this is the first book my child with dyslexia has managed to read all year. And it's nice to be able to create something that can be
Works.
Yeah, works across children and adults and gives everyone something to.
But I feel like it's not just about being autistic. You know, you've got that lovely description of different sexualities, and the way different people identify at the beginning. You know, and then you've got a little arrow saying, this is me, I'm a woman, I'm a girl, and other people may identify in different ways. And, you know, even that, I've learned things just from reading that, and I thought I was pretty clued up, but actually, as you say, language is always evolving and changing, and our role as writers is to try and be at the forefront of that, and to educate through brilliance and through storytelling, or through, you know, really excellent non-fiction, as you're doing, to try and enlighten the wider world, and really elevate our own lives so that they can, you know, just become part of the for want of a better word, sort of normative narrative. Do you want to just read the little section on being neurotypical, so that we all make sure we understand what that is?
So neurotypical is the opposite of being neurodivergent. A person who is neurotypical has a more typical way of thinking. Their brain experiences the world and reacts to it in a way that is largely understood by society. And
okay, yeah. So hopefully I've got it. Hopefully I am going to express that difference in the right way. And neurodiversity covers the full spectrum. So that's all of us.
So that's the full spectrum of brain types, celebrates the importance of each one, and includes both neurodivergent and neurotypical people.
Excellent. Okay. And then lastly, I just want to talk about the little section in your book, which is on page 140, you know, which is quite a sad section, but I think it's really worth referencing, that all of you have discussed bullying in all of your books. All of your characters or your shared life experience makes quite a heavy reference to bullying, even if it's subtle. We're going to come to you next, Elle, and it's absolutely not subtle in your book. But Abigail, I just wanted to talk about this lovely event that you've really courageously shared. We won't read it out, but we'll just discuss it.
Yeah.
Where you get to the classroom, and some of the kids have barricaded the door, and they tell you to climb over the tables, and then as soon as you do, they shake the tables, and so that you start to fall off. And then you just say, yeah, I had enough. I was exhausted at trying to be normal, which was clearly not working. I hadn't done anything to these boys. I was just being me. The anger rose inside of me, and I leapt on one of the boys and grabbed hold of his hair. And honestly, in that moment, I was like, yes, because I think sometimes there needs to be a repercussion. And I'm absolutely not condoning violence in any way. But I feel like it's really important to talk about the, the cerebral process of what's going on for you in that moment, because so often that can just be classified as violence or as a meltdown, or, as someone not coping or being overwhelmed. And people think that it's about that particular moment, and they don't realise that it's a build-up.
Yeah.
That it's almost like a computer game. You've been losing lives all day to different things, when you've got to deal with a busy bus, or, somewhat a horrible smell in the canteen, or someone getting your name wrong, or, I don't know, someone sharpening a pencil, a myriad of different things. And then suddenly someone does this, and that is it. So I think it's really wonderful that you've been so eloquent about that and honest.
Yeah, I remember at the time being so angry, upset, frustrated, overwhelmed in a sensory way as well, because the class was all laughing and talking, and as usual I couldn't physically speak to say anything, like leave me alone. And I'm pretty sure my face was sort of just in the same position, and like I was too overwhelmed to react all the times that anyone has ever said things, and I would just stay still and not know how to fight back or to talk back or anything. Yeah, because I have problem when I'm in a stressful situation, I can't speak, and that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't physically leave the classroom because any minute the teacher would arrive to take the register, plus all the tables were still blocking the door. But yeah, I was angry, and I went over to the boy and I pulled his hair, but it was that was the only moment that I'd ever done anything like that, and it still was a lot less than I've seen other people do, and it just kind of stuck with me as a memory, as I'd never shown any sort of verbal or physical reaction to bullying before, and I just simply tried to ignore it. And actually I nearly removed that bit about pulling his hair from the book, as I didn't want to promote violence in any way, but I felt it was necessary to tell the facts and to follow it by saying I'm not proud of how I reacted, but I've been pushed to my limits, and you can't keep pushing someone and not expect a reaction. And I hope that by being honest about my experience, that would help anyone who reads it who has either been through something similar or who has been on the bullying side of it, to think, okay, yeah, I shouldn't be pushing someone, or I have a right to speak up for myself, because I've also included tips on what to do if you or someone is being bullied. So there's the practical things of this is what you do next, but it shouldn't have to get this far. But for me, I didn't know I was being bullied, and I had a lack of confidence in my own judgment, and my lack of ability to verbally express myself made it impossible for me to ask for help. And I think that is a really important thing to highlight, and I wanted children to have tips and to know that it can get better and you can free yourself.
And also I think it's important to remember that anyone can get bullied, for any reason, autism aside. And I bet that was a real shock for those boys. I bet they all kind of realised that they perhaps couldn't continue to treat you like that. Or, well, that's my hope anyway. In any big film, when we see someone being picked on or bullied, we always are just desperate for them to get some revenge or retaliate in some way. So, I'm, as I said, I don't want to condone violence, but I feel like that was an important moment for you, actually, and it's a really great moment in the book. Elle, we're going to come to you, my lovely, now, and we're going to talk about your beautiful book. Gosh, it's so moving and it's so character driven, it's almost hard to describe the story, because you feel like the story that you've gone on has been to step into Addie's shoes, and that you're just absolutely surrounded by her world, as if you've dived underwater, as if you're just completely immersed in her world. And it is very, very sensory, and you know, just a description of the difference between a dolphin and a shark can suddenly be so moving, because it's so loaded, and she's so emotionally invested in all the things that she cares about. I mean, I'm sure that everyone has heard of this wonderful book already, A Kind of Spark. But Elle, would you like to just, because obviously the book is massively successful, would you like to just talk about your journey to becoming published? Because this is your book.
It's my debut. It came out last summer, and I left school in 2010, so I'm in my 20s. I just missed Holly's books. If Holly's books had got to the library in time, this might have all been very different. But I didn't have any kind of characters in my library growing up in school that used the word autistic, or indeed even really had a lot of coded language. And I felt that deficit. I was diagnosed young and spent time in inclusion units, and it was difficult. And so when I went into the publishing industry to do editorial stuff in my 20s, I started when I was 22, 23. So it's been a few years now. I'd go into rooms and say, first of all, there needs to be more disability rep in general, when they would say, you know, why do you want to work in children's publishing, or what do you do in editor, whatever the question was. I would say there needs to.
So you would say that in your interview?
Yeah.
You would just say, right, well, I want to change it, and these are the changes that I want to see.
And this is a very autistic thing, because they tell you when you go to a job interview to be opinionated and to be, you know, forthright, and I just took that literally. And
that's not what they mean.
No, they don't mean that at all. And I would say, yeah, I would never, you know, name names. I would never say your list is appalling and you need to have more, you know, I would never say that, but I would sort of imply it. I'd say, you know, I did research on it. I do have a big spreadsheet, and I said the statistics are about less than 0.05% of protagonists are disabled. It's very poor, and it can't just be on you know, a couple of authors to carry the representation. And they said things like, well, when I talked about neurodiversity and being autistic, they say, well, those books don't sell, you know, people don't like to read about that. It doesn't do well in the foreign, there's no audience, it doesn't have a market, it doesn't do well in the foreign market. And so
but the other thing, just to cut you off, I think the other point that it's really worth making with all of diversity, actually, not just disability, is that I think what's happened historically in the publishing industry is that rather than giving own voice authors, so what we mean by that is people with a lived experience of that disability or neurodiversity, instead of giving us a chance to write and create our own stories, what they've done is go to, you know, someone super famous and successful already and say, can we just shoehorn a wheelchair user?
Yeah, precisely.
Story about penguins or something.
Yeah, it's very true. And I would say, and you know, they say things like, those people don't write books, you know, we can't work with people like that. And I would say, that's me, you're talking about me, people like me. and they'd look horrified. But that was what I was used to. And then I went to a tiny little publisher in Brixton called Knights of, who only publish inclusive books. Hopefully, I think some people in the audience probably know them.
Who are not so tiny anymore.
No, not
they
so
have been
small.
tiny when you approach them, but they are definitely on the rise. They are a shining star.
They're pretty great. And I said, look, if you ever need an editorial like rundown, you know, never ever need any help to do with neurodiversity, give me a call. And they said, do you write? Have you got a book? And I had like 2/3 of a draft at that point, and I said, yeah, you can look at this. And I remember as I was leaving the office, I was like, but still, once you've turned down this manuscript, give me a call if you need a proofreader. And they didn't turn down the manuscript. That was a kind of spark. And and it's been a bit of a whirlwind since then. But they really believed in empowering own voice as authors, and and that kind of authentic voice, and to have, it's quite emotional actually to be here on this panel with Holly and with Abigail and with you, because this was not happening 2 years. I've been talking about this in rooms for years, and it doesn't happen for neurodiversity. So it's starting to change, and that's really exciting.
I think we're on the precipice of a massive change, actually, and I think that you lovely ladies are leading the way. And I really do feel like in the next couple of years we're going to have, a real wealth of lesser known stories really shining through, and it's going to just be really joyful and wonderful to be a part of. And certainly many more panels with Waterstones, surely. I mean, after the success of this one, we almost may have to give up our day jobs because we'll just be on panels and hosting.
And I want to just shout out that Waterstones have been so supportive from the jump. As soon as we said, we, meaning me and the publishers, said we just want this to get to as many autistic readers as possible, Waterstones were phenomenal. So thank you, Waterstones.
I mean, I think obviously that, they're a massive and wonderful chain, and they have really lovely, well-stocked stores, but also from spending lots of time in Waterstones as a writer, writing in the cafes, you get to see just the amount of kids who come through all the time, and the parents who are just really desperate for diverse books. And actually, when I've been in Brighton Waterstones, actually, just when we used to live there, I would be writing in the cafe, and a parent would come in, and the lovely staff there would know that I was an author, and they would say, "Oh well, yeah, I mean, there are some books I can recommend, but you could ask Cerrie because she might know." And it was great, and I was really, really happy to always advise. And I think that, as I say, that the diversity of stories that we're going to have to celebrate over the coming few years is going to be really exciting. Children's literature is absolutely pioneering and leading the way, and television is, and the rest of media is starting to catch up. Everything takes a little bit longer, but we're the front runners, really, and it's up to us to tell the bold stories and to nurture change and to really be part of that super inclusive culture. Before we open up the discussion and, before we talk to all of the lovely panelists more in a general sense, I just want to quickly talk to you, Elle, about the character of Addie, and how important the role of Keedy, her older sister, is. So I've got this lovely section on page 12. I'm just going to read a little bit here. "Oh, I see." Nina sips some more of her juice. "It's a little secret between you two. Bad lights are the kind of lights that are so bright they give people like me headaches. They hurt our eyes. They are visually loud." Keedy is Nina's twin, but she's not like Nina. She's like me, autistic, like me. So Addie's had this amazing journey with her sister, who's really kind of nourished her and looked after her and really explained to her why she does certain things, and why she shouldn't have a low self-esteem about that, i.e. the bad handwriting, or the, well, I say bad, but the less than neat handwriting, which, by the way, my handwriting is, definitely less than neat, sometimes unreadable. I mean, everyone's just on devices now anyway, aren't they? So let's not worry about that. Calligraphy's on the way out. But how different do you think Addie's story and experiences in life may have been without such a strong and empathetic role model as her older sister, who'd already been through it all, to guide her?
Well, I think the reason there's two of them is it's quite a common trope in books about autistic children that are let's be honest, always written by non-autistic people. And it's usually from the point of view of a neurotypical child, and they're talking about how difficult it is to have a sibling who's autistic. And they go on and on about how difficult it is. And I said, I want to write about a sibling relationship that doesn't involve any of that, where it's actually they're both autistic, because it's very common in families for there to be more than one neurodivergent person. And so, yeah, Kitty's gone through it all, and she doesn't want Addie to go through it alone. And I think that's why the great thing about the relationship in the book is I think young readers look up to Kitty, and that's what they tell me anyway. They love her and they think she's funny and they think she's, you know, a good cheeky character. And then the adults really see them, you know, adults who are self-diagnosed and waiting for that diagnosis, or who think they might be autistic, they really connect to her. And I think that relationship is the heart of the book. And I just wanted to write a beautiful relationship that involved neurodiversity and wasn't triggering or traumatic or acting as if somebody's a burden because they have a different kind of brain. And that's what kind of made the book work, I think, and that's what carried the story. And Kitty's stories is a bit of an adult story hidden in a children's book, and I think people relate to that as well.
No, they absolutely do. And I feel like it's interesting what you're saying about the sort of burden struggle element, because if anyone has that role in the story, in fact, it's Nina. It's the two autistic sisters trying to understand the sister who isn't autistic, who, you know, who's just, you know, a little bit shallow.
She's got her problems. Yeah, she's
yes, and is she doesn't have the same level of empathy, and she doesn't have the bond that they have. And it is a highly emotive and emotional story, and it's just, the whole experience is like a really imaginative, sensory and beautiful dream. So thank you for writing something just so from the heart, because I think anyone, well, just anyone, but particularly someone who has a person with autism or an autistic person in their family, would just learn so much from reading this, even if that person's autism manifests very differently. I think just having that insight and awareness to just how overwhelming the sensory experience can be is really, really useful. And I love some of Addie's humour as well, and like the section where she's talking about great whites, and the librarian or the teacher that she really gets on with says, you know, how are the great whites? And she's like, brilliant, actually, you know, let me just find it. Good, I reply, placing my lunchbox on the table. No great white shark has ever survived captivity. They die almost instantly. It's like he's asked her how the sharks are. She just comes, you know.
Yeah, they're dead, basically. That's how they are.
He's like, oh no, that's dreadful. And she's like, no, it's brilliant, because now no one's trying to capture them. They're just free. And I thought that was a very clever metaphor, actually, really, really lovely for that kind of freedom that she is seeking and searking.
Oh, thank you.
A general question, I guess, for all of you, which is obviously that things are really changing, but what further work do you think needs to be done, especially by people within the publishing industry, and how can neurotypical authors help to be an ally for you or an advocate? So if you want to answer one at a time, maybe just raise a hand so that I can see who would like to answer first. Holly, over to you.
I like raising my hand for questions. Yeah, so I think for me, two things jump into mind. I think one, the publishing industry needs to stop pigeonholing neurodivergency and making it niche. Like, we are not writing books that are for like a small minority of readerships. Like, these are not books that are just for people who happen to be autistic. These are books that like everybody can read. And I think that what is nice about my late diagnosis in Geek Girl was that everyone loved Geek Girl, they didn't know she was autistic, but they loved her, which I think shows that you can be, you know, a bestseller as a neurodivergent writer with a neurodivergent character, and that everyone can buy it. It's not just for people who have the same diagnosis. So I think that's the first thing that's important. Go up.
Oh, sorry. I was going to add, that's a brilliant point, and I would say publishers also need to be aware that we are their customer. I think they sometimes, even if, you know, they just talk about us like we're never in the room, or that we'll never read any kind of book, let alone books about, you know, people like us. So it's, yeah, I didn't want to interrupt, but I was saying that.
Thank you. No, I think I totally agree, and I think we need to. They have an urge in the publishing industry to put people in boxes and to go, well, this is our neurodivergent box, and this is our male box, and this is our, you know, and it's just nonsense. Like, we write stories that are relevant for everybody. We write, you know, we have brains that work, you know, beautifully, and have stories that are, you know, completely relevant to the entire population. So they're not niche. It's not like, oh, we get to tick a box and we've just, you know, kind of filled out, you know, diversity kind of fulfillment. It's like, we are giving the world amazing stories about amazing people. So that was the first thing. And the second thing is, I think, as you look at the panel in front of you, we're all white women. So I think that it really needs to be, you know, it's brilliant that we're opening the doors to neurodivergency, and I think that's really important, but I think it needs to be really aware that just as in the public domain, autism is still a little white boy thing, and that's breaking apart, hopefully slowly. The fact that we are all white women in the publishing industry means that there's still a long way to go to make sure that diversity is including everybody in every single way.
Yeah.
That's neurodivergent. So
I guess we can use our privilege to highlight that and to try and open the door wider, for more diverse authors to come through. Abigail, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I was just going to say the last bit that Holly said about how we are all obviously white females, and I was going to say also, like, it's important to note that although I'm autistic, queer, female, I'm obviously in a great position of privilege, being white and having access to an NHS diagnosis in the UK, and we need to tell more real life stories in books by Black autistic people, by autistic trans and non-binary people, and autistics who are self-diagnosed and are proud of that because they might have barriers to getting our diagnosis. These people are out there, and there are people writing brilliant, eye-opening things on Instagram and Twitter, and like with lots of followers and stuff. Their stories deserve to be told too. And yeah, the publishing world needs more diverse points of view and more unique ways of telling these stories.
Yeah, and I think as well what's important, because I didn't just mean diversity across, but I mean like autistic diversity, as in the different voices within the autistic community. And I think what's really lovely about all of our books is, despite them being about white girls who are autistic, they're also different. We all have such different voices. We have such different sense of humour, different ways of approaching things. You know, there's a big difference between me and Elle's book, for instance, because Harriet's not diagnosed, and
huge difference between all of them, but all equally enlightening and just glorious to read. I'm just going to open up the Q&A and let me see if I can just read this to you. Holly, a question for you. What advice would you give to a woman who think that they might be autistic?
I mean, it's such a tough one, because it's not a very linear path. Like, when I suspected I might be, I rang my NHS doctor and she laughed at me and told me to go away. Like, I literally, and it was literally it was during COVID, and I literally said, what would be the process for an adult diagnosis of autism? And she went, you're nearly 40. That's the sort of thing they'd have found out at school. And I was like, they didn't know, so that's why I'm ringing you. And she was like, well, you're going to need to prove it, because I'm not just going to put you through to the, you know. And I was like, me being autistic, I was like, I'm sorry, I don't appreciate your tone. I'm going to be putting the phone down now. I put the phone down on her.
Well,
so
yes.
I had to pay for it, essentially. I had to go private, because the NHS, by that point, I was too distressed, and I was like, I'm not fighting. I've been fighting nearly 40 years to understand myself, and to understand, like, I was in such a bad place mental health wise. I was so depressed, so, like, you know, eating disorders all over the shop, and I didn't have anything left to keep fighting the NHS, basically, so I went private. So I don't think you should
I don't think you're alone, Holly, and I think actually, you know, even autistic girls in schools you know, who are my daughter's age and younger, the parents are having to somehow go privately to get the diagnosis because it is just being passed off as behaviour and it's being missed.
Yes. Totally.
What you do is setting people up for horrific failure.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Really damaging mental health.
Yeah, I think if you think you might be, I think read as much as you can, research as much as you can. I mean, if you're autistic, you're probably going to be doing that anyway. And then try and speak to a DT, it's a lot of self-application, and I really hate that that is where we're at, but that is where we're at. You've got to fight for yourself because no one is going to listen otherwise. So yeah, you do have to, you know, if I hadn't been...
But maybe the Autistic Society would help, or...
I think they have links that I don't know the exact process, but yeah, I think it's not a link.
I'm going to just move us on to the next question just because I don't want to run out of time. Such a great talk, thank you. This is from the lovely Beth Westbrook. I'm a playwright and wrote Sunny Girl, a one-woman play about a young woman finding out she was autistic because I was tired of the lack of representation. The script is getting a teeny bit of buzz and I would be interested in adapting it into a book. Do you have any advice? So I don't know who would like to take that question. If any of you...
I'll take it.
I think it's harder to do it the other way around. I think it's harder to adapt something into a script. I may or may not be going through this. It's quite hard to write scripts. So I would say just write the draft zero, meaning this draft that nobody will ever see. It's not even a first draft, it's a draft zero, and it can be the absolute worst piece of fiction you've ever written, but you're telling yourself the story in book form. So turn off that judgmental voice and just get that A to Z down, which you already know because you have your screenplay, so you know what the plot is, you know what the structure is. So just get it down in a literary form. And I know it's hard to say this to anybody. I know it's especially hard to say this to people who may be neurodivergent, but try and turn off that critical voice. It's so hard to do, but that's the only way you can get that first draft down. And you've got your structure, so you'll be fine. You can do it. All four of us believe in you. I think it'll be great.
Beth, I would also add, if you haven't read Elle's book, actually, then definitely do, because there are lots of bits of that could. It is almost like a script, but from Addie's perspective. So that might be a really excellent book to read. I'm just going to see, I'm really not a technical woman, but let's see if I can do this. So we've got similar questions for you, Holly, about diagnosis. Then we've got a question, strange left field question, but what should neurodiverse readers do to help things improve? Would anyone like to take that? So that's specifically for readers. Yeah.
Buy the books, read the books, buy the books, get them from libraries, tell your friends, pass them on. Like, that is how, you know, it's by making the books that are neurodivergent popular and well read that is going to open the doors in the publishing industry, because frankly, publishing runs by money, and I hate to say it, but it does. So, you know, if a book sells lots, they go, we want more books like that. So if you sell lots of books as a neurodivergent author, then they will go, okay, let's have a look at more neurodivergent authors. That's very simple. So
thank you, Holly. That was as a parent with a child with autism who is starting to go into their teen years, could you give me any advice on how to best support them? So I feel like that is perhaps not a literary based question, but if anyone wants to just do a quick reply to that, then please go ahead. Well, I'd like to say, get all of these books, actually, particularly Abby's, which is, you know, is just a really, really useful guidebook, and is brilliantly informative, but definitely get all of the books.
I would say the most important thing to do if you've got a child who is autistic and struggling at school is to make sure that you are giving them so much support at home that they've always got somewhere to go and talk to someone about something that they're struggling with. Because the reality is that, as you can see from all three of our books, we all struggle with bullying all the time. I mean, I don't think there's ever been an autistic person that doesn't. So there's a lot of trauma that's going to be happening, and there's not a lot you can do about that other than giving them somewhere to talk about it, to unpack it, to support support them and to boost their confidence again, so that it's not constantly just being knocked down. And I know that sounds really negative, but you've got to.
Yeah, being someone who had a really, really tough time post-diagnosis in school, I went to counselling. I don't know how available that will be at the school. Again, this is a very difficult situation to judge, but counselling really helped because my family were so stressed about my diagnosis. They were so stressed about all of the upheavals that we couldn't have those conversations. So having a counsellor was really, really helpful. But I do appreciate that that might not be possible, but it really did help, because sometimes it's just good to just talk, even if you're not sure what you're saying. So that's all I can think of to add to that.
And don't criticize them at home either. There's some really good points on the thingy. Like we're getting enough of it. Like literally, when you're autistic, I think when you're autistic, neurotypical people don't quite realize what it's like to be autistic and to have everything you do, say, move, every kind of thing picked at and poked at and told that it's wrong. So when those children are at home, they need to be able to be themselves without being told to stop doing this, stop saying that. That's a weird thing to say. That's, you know, they need to be able to just decompress. It sounds really simple, but it is so important, I think.
And then are there any books that really influenced you in a positive way and made you want to write? That's a question for anyone that wants to take it.
I feel like I'm taking them all. Abby, what about you? Putting you on the spot. You mute.
Well, I never was good at answering questions on the spot, like at school when a teacher would say, Abby, your turn to speak. Mine goes blank. Books that made me want to write.
You loved
And
as a
all
child.
the books I've ever read have gone out of my head.
I loved Anne of Green Gables when I was younger, and I'm pretty fiercely passionate. Well, no, I'm pretty convinced that Anne Shirley was autistic. Like, she's hyperlexic, she struggles socially, she takes things literally. I think for me, she was the only character I read.
Runs up on the roof.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
runs away.
Dyes her hair green. Like, you know, she felt like me. And when I was a kid, she was the only person I read in books that felt like me. Other than Lisa Simpson, who was on TV, who also felt like me. But those two characters. And now looking back, I'm like, well, they're both autistic, so that makes sense. But yeah, I think Anne of Green Gables was the love of my life when I was 11. I thought that she was going to be my soulmate forever. I was properly jealous of Diana.
There's a really gorgeous Netflix adaptation, actually. I don't know if you've seen it. It's no, not into it. Okay.
I'm a Megan Fellows fan. If you're not Megan Fellows, you're not Anna Green.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the ultimate one.
Yeah.
My company used to do the social media for that Netflix show, Leanne.
Wow.
And with me.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, my loves. Well, that was a fabulous event. It's been so great to talk to you all and just hear about your brilliant work and how graciously you're sharing your lives and your expertise through literature. It's really enlightening, and you're helping to really amplify neurodivergent voices. So thank you, because it's so needed and so necessary. And it's been a delight to be part of this panel, and I wish you all a wonderful summer. And I'm sending you all lots of love, and thank you to everyone who joined the event. Well, I hope you've all had a wonderful time. You can all go and have a lovely glass of wine now. Again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.